All right, here we go. 5 bets, 5 minutes. The wild card edition rolls on. We gave you 2 games on Sunday. Now we have 3 here on we gave you 2 on Saturday, and now we have 3 for you here on Sunday. Helps if I know what day we're talking about, because I'm about to give you 5 bets. So if I don't know what day it is, what the hell's going on here? Somehow Odd Shopper has kept me around, even though I don't even know what the hell's going on. So I'll ask you ahead of time and remind you at the end. You can hit the thumbs up button, subscribe. But to be fair, anybody and everybody on YouTube's asking you that, no matter how big or small their brain is. So you're used to that. Thank you. Also, we have some really cool opportunities, including $5 into $200. But let's not waste any time. Let's start the clock. 46 seconds in. We're getting better. We're getting better. All right, first play on the board is the guy behind me, Josh Allen. Yes, the love for DeMar continues. Yes, the Buffalo Bills are the public favorite across the board. And I don't even mean as far as betting. I just mean the story right now. It's really difficult to see what happened ever since the Buffalo Bills witnessed the near passing of their teammate on the field. And all the collective response that happened not only in the game, but around the world. And think that's not helping to fuel the Buffalo Bills this Sunday, and only this Sunday today. That's all we care about against a third string.
Oh, no, it's fine. I was just moving my thing over here. Good afternoon, everybody. And hey, MMA is back. At least UFC is. We've got a DraftKings and FanDuel card to talk about today. And it's been a minute since there's been a UFC card. It's been about a month. And I'm sorry that we're not going right up until lock like we normally do. But there's NFL playoffs, and that also takes precedent. So if you guys are in Discord and you have questions for us, add us. We'll answer them during the show. If you guys are in YouTube chat hanging out, ask us questions. We'll hit on some of those as well as you come in. Like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Shout out to PrizePicks, the sponsor of today's show. But Josh, what is happening? How are you feeling about the return of UFC?
Yeah, I feel like we're in Inception here. Strickland ended 2022 UFC card on the main event. Now he's back on the first fight card of 2023. That was an injury. You know, Kelvin Gastelum said mouth injury. Kind of feel like he couldn't stop eating on Christmas, maybe. But if he is hurt, you know, hopefully he gets better soon.
He could have hurt his mouth eating. It's very possible.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I kind of like this card. I wish it wasn't 11 fights. A couple fights fell off, weight cutting issues, but you know, 11 fights, at least it's not 9. There's going to be some heavy chalk options we'll talk about, but I think there's some nice, you know, lower owned options that we can get in today.
Yeah, the fight that I'm most bummed that fell out is I was really looking forward to watching Shavkat Rakhmonov fight against Jeff Neal. I really want to see Rakhmonov in a step up in competition. And, you know, we're still getting that fight. It's happening a couple months from now, but I think we really could have used it to bolster this particular card. And then, you know, it's really weird when you look at this card from a perspective. You look at all the lines and all the favorites that are on the card, and it's kind of hard to find underdogs to like just from this standpoint. Look at some of the lines we've got. We've got, you know, like Charles Johnson is a moderate favorite relative to the other lines on the card, and he's still a minus 350. Then we've got Dan Argetta now, who's up to a minus like 550 to minus 450 favorite, depending where you're looking. We've got Ribecchi priced at minus 750. You know, Umar Nurmagomedov, he is north of a plus 1,000 favorite, depending where you look. So how are you going to go about building some of your lineups when there are all these really high upside players at the top end? But because there's so many of them, it means that conversely, there's nobody to really save money with on the bottom end. So how does this impact the way you approach the slate?
Yeah, this is a problem. But the one thing, Dan Argetta, I don't even know how to pronounce it, but he was in the prize. He was listed at 8,600 when he was fighting Isaac Dulgarian, and that fell off. And then Nick Aguirre came in. So he's a minus 550 favorite at 8,600. That's going to be like, that's just a massive value per his line based on his DK price. So I feel like a lot of people are just going to start there. They're going to see, oh, it's minus 600 at 8,600. He's not at 9,500. So I'm just going to put him in. So like you can build min range here, but like I feel like you need someone in the top range. Like Ribecchi had a very quick wrestling based finish on the Contender Series. Cousin Umar is Khabib's cousin. You see the last name, it always makes your eyebrows raise. You have Nasimento. You know, those flyweights get after it. It could be a high-paced fight there. Charles Johnson, like, it's just really tough. Like, and you look at like the underdogs that you want to possibly have, you know, exposure to. They're not like 7,100. They're 7,900. Like Ribiero, Sean Strickland in the main event, not a, you know, a massive dog at 7,700. You know what I mean? So when you're getting down to the 7,300 and under, you're just kind of hoping that they can make it to the bell. You know what I mean? It gets to the judges' cards and not all these guys get quick finish, because otherwise you're looking at a winning lineup possibly with only 5 wins.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask, is how live do you think it is for us to have a winning lineup that's going to have a loser? Just where it's like, hey, if so many of these favorites play to what the betting lines are, we just aren't going to see underdogs winning very frequently today. If that's the case, could we see somebody like a Carlos Hernandez who's more likely to go to the distance? Like, could he put up 35, 40 fantasy points and be in an optimal lineup just because there are so few underdogs that we expect to win? Is that something you're considering?
Yeah, I am. And like the Javid Basharat fight, like he's fighting Mendoza or Mandanka, however you pronounce it. But like Basharat in his 2 UFC fights have gone the distance. So yeah, his opponent's 7K. It's like maybe he goes the distance there. I'll put him in. But then you have these like guys like Nick Aguirre, Jimmy Flick. If they're going to win, they're probably going to win by finish. But if they get finished as well, like they have no floor. So in GBPs, yeah, maybe you'll take a shot and maybe Jimmy Flick wins by submission. But like if these guys don't hit their one-outers here, you're hoping that like you get a guy who goes to decision, scores 35, 40 points in a loss, and it's enough.
Yeah, and I'm definitely going to use some of the tools that we have over at Stokastic.com to help me make some decisions today. And this is one of these slates where I do think there's a lot of variance to it, just where there's so many big favorites. And I do think there's a good chance that a losing fighter is going to be on an optimal lineup. So I'm going to be talking a good amount about our boom bust tool over the course of the show. And if you guys do want access for free to everything we have over at Stokastic.com, get a 5-day free trial for our MMA package if you've never signed up before by clicking on the link that we have below. And Mike is going to be throwing that into the YouTube chat in a second as well. So if you guys want to check out all the stuff we have there, it is our projections, ownership projections. But then in addition, we've got our boom bust tool, which is going to give you percentage odds of each player's or each fighter's having optimal scores relative to their ownership and leverage score. So it's a really useful way to figure out, number one, not just who are the best projected plays on the slate, but also who's over-owned, who's under-owned, good ways to go and approach lineups in large field tournaments and to allocate some exposures. But let's start by talking about the main event as well. We've got Nasruddin Imavov taking on Sean Strickland. So Strickland stepping in on short notice. Like you said, 2 main events in a row for Strickland. He fought at UFC the last fight night, which was about a month ago. He took on Jared Cannonier in the main event. It was fairly close. I'm not going to say it was controversial. I think it was reasonable to say either one of those guys could have won that fight. But now we've got Sean Strickland as a slight underdog, but also potentially a big size advantage. He weighed in at 204 pounds at the weigh-in. We saw Imavov come in at 194. Does it impact how you look at this fight at all?
It has to, just because Sean Strickland, he wouldn't take a 5-round main event if he wasn't in shape. That dude's always in the gym. He's always sparring. Neither of these guys had to cut weight. You know, Strickland came in at 204, but Imavov at 194, where his path to victory might like actually be wrestling. Like if the fight was at 185, I think he would have to grapple because, you know, unless he knocked out Sean Strickland, which we've seen happen before, it's going to be a competitive fight on the feet. Now, Sean Strickland has pretty good takedown defense, but now if you're going into a fight with a guy who has an 85% takedown defense and he has a 10-pound advantage on you, and he probably has better cardio than you. Like we've never seen Imavov really tested in these later rounds. We saw his UFC debut against who was it? It was Jordan Williams, who Jordan Williams is a great story, by the way. He was the first UFC athlete, or one of the first fighters to fight professionally with type 2 diabetes. So he had weight cutting issues, as it was, but like you saw in that 3-round fight, Imavov really kind of fade in the 3rd round. You saw he lost a decision to Phil Hawes. He faded hard in that one. And then he won a couple by finish in the 2nd round. And then, he beat Buckley by decision, but he kind of also faded. Like Sean Strickland, one of his things is cardio. So if this is a close competitive fight going into the 4th round, you really have to favor Strickland here, especially at 205. He didn't have to cut weight. He's in shape. He's a better wrestler. He has higher output. Like Imavov nicknamed the Russian sniper, which is a good nickname, but his output is the issue. You know what I mean? Like 4.08 strikes landed per minute is okay, but a lot of that came, ground and pound in his 2 finishes. So, on the feet, he doesn't have high output. Sean Strickland's going to push the pace. Imavov's going to get tired. It's kind of hard not to favor Strickland, especially in a 5-round fight.
Yeah, and he's one of the most popular fighters on the card, and I think it's warranted in this scenario, just from the standpoint of this. It is so hard to find cheap fighters that we really like we were talking about before, and Sean Strickland at $7,700. Number one, you guys should be playing him in cash games for sure over on DK. FanDuel is going to be a little bit of a different scenario when we were looking at this fight. It's a decent one to target, but not quite the same as what it is on DraftKings, just because the finish is so much more important on FanDuel. And for DraftKings purposes, I don't expect this fight to finish inside the distance. I think it is going to go to the judges' scorecards. And then I think some of the security Sean Strickland brings to the table, and just the fact, too, that I just don't find that many fighters that I like to target sub 8K, and Strickland's kind of one of them by default. And even in a loss, I think he should score fairly decently. So Strickland's going to be one of my most rostered fighters, and I'm certainly going to have more exposure to him than Imavov. And Imavov, I don't even know how much I'm going to play of him in tournaments because there's so many other high-end fighters that I like more than him. So what are you going to be doing with Imavov? I think a lot of people are going to be targeting Strickland. Makes sense. But what are you going to do with Imavov in tournaments?
Imavov at 8,700. He was in the pool, at that price when he's fighting Gastelum. Now he gets a tougher matchup. He's kind of like, he's overpriced per his odds. We'll just put it that way. And then you look at the ownership projection on him. Like he's still coming in around 30% just because it's a main event fighter. So if he's going to come in around that percentage, I'm going to be under the field just because like you said, it's really hard to find someone under 8K that you like. Strickland's going to have the output advantage. Like you look at his last fight against Cannonier in a loss, he had 152 significant strikes over 5 rounds. If he repeats that, you know what I mean? Like he's still going to score well, even if he loses the decision. So Imavov, I guess would be a, leverage play in GPPs, but even so, he would probably need an early-ish finish to be on the optimal lineup here tonight. There's a lot of finishers up in the top range.
Yeah, that's how I see it as well. And that's the issue I have with getting to Imavov. It's just, number one, Strickland's one of my favorite value plays. And obviously, if I'm playing Strickland, it's not going to have Imavov in that lineup as well. And I think I prefer just about every other fighter on the card priced around Imavov. All the fighters priced above him, all the fighters priced a little bit below him. Like you mentioned, Dan Argetta when we were doing the intro. I just like so many other guys better than Imavov, and I like Strickland in the fight. So a little concerned that Strickland, according to at least himself in interviews, is that he has not trained since his last fight, and nor has he lived or eaten healthy. But it's kind of hard to take Sean Strickland's interview seriously for multiple ways, and I'm going to be backing him in this fight. And I think a lot of people will as well, and Imavov is just going to be hard to prioritize. And then as we get into the co-main event, it's kind of funny. A lot of the fights, or at least the fights towards the top of the card, we just talked about the main event, and then we're going to talk about Ige, Damon Jackson, then a little bit Ketlin Vieira, Raquel Pennington. I like a lot of the fights at the top of the card more, at least for DFS purposes. So we'll talk more about those later. But the next one, Dan Ige versus Damon Jackson. I think there's more finishing equity in Dan Ige, so I lean towards him in large field tournaments. But another fight that I'm not really prioritizing all that heavily because I think it's one of the fights that's more likely to go to decision on this card relative to some of the other ones. So Dan Ige, Damon Jackson, how are you going to be playing this fight?
So this is an interesting one because I like Damon Jackson as a fighter. The problem is yeah, his durability compared to Ige, not as good. You saw Ilia Topuria send him to the shadow realm in the first round. Now Ilia Topuria looks like he's going to challenge for the belt, but it's still a knockout loss. And then you see the 4 wins he has after that. Charles Rosa, like, anyone can take Charles Rosa down. He's just impossible to submit. Like, he has the best defensive jiu-jitsu in the UFC probably, but he just can never get off from the bottom. Then he beat Kamela Kirk by submission. That's okay. Like, then he beat Dan Argueta, who's fighting today, but like Argetta pushed him pretty hard there. Then he knocked out Pat Sabatini in a minute. Like, Pat Sabatini just got caught there. Then you look at Danny Ige's resume. Yeah, he's lost 4 of 5, but the losses are Calvin Kattar, the Korean Zombie, Josh Emmett, and Evelev. Like, all those guys have fought for or have contended for the belt in the featherweight division. That is a gauntlet. And then the one win he had, the first punch he landed on Gavin Tucker, he knocked him out. Now, that was kind of a lucky punch or whatever happened there. So you can't really rely on Dan Ige coming out, hitting Damon Jackson once, and him going down. But you look at the other loss Damon Jackson has in the UFC. Before that, like, yeah, he lost by bulldog choke to Yancy Medeiros, but that was way back in 2014. Like, since he came back to the UFC in 2020, he's beaten Mirsad Bektic, but the problem there was Bektic took him down 7 times, controlled him, and Mirsad Bektic's big problem, when he gasses, he's done. And then he lost to Ilia Topuria, right? Danny Ige is kind of like a Walmart version of Topuria and Bektic combined. Like, Ige has the wrestling, he has the striking, he has the power, but like, he's not this high upside finisher. So while I think Ige should be the rightful favorite, I have a tough time getting there in DraftKings or in DFS just because, like, the finishing upside might be there, but if it goes to the decision, I don't think he's going to be on the optimal lineup.
Yeah, like I said, if I had to play a side of this fight, I would lean towards Ige. I did bet Dan Ige at a slightly better number than what's available right now. I bet him at -110, depending where you look. He's anywhere from -125 to -140 now is Dan Ige. So I like that. But in terms of DraftKings purposes, like I said, if I had to play one side, I prefer Ige, but this is a low priority fight relative to some of the other ones. And not the lowest priority fight on the entire card. That one's pretty clear, and that'll be in a couple fights. We talk about Ketlin Vieira and Raquel Pennington. But once again, Dan Ige, Damon Jackson, not going to be a high priority fight for me. The next one is, though. We've got Punahele Soriano taking on Roman Kopylov, and Soriano has a lot of power. And if you look at a lot of his wins, he scores fairly well on DraftKings. And, you know, you look at some of the fights that he had to open up his UFC career, where we saw the fight against Oscar Pichota, first round knockout, Dusko Todorovic, first round knockout with a couple of knockdowns. And then he kind of got wrestle fucked by Nick Maximov, 11 takedowns in that fight. And then last time out, knocks out Dolce Lungiambula in the second round. So just because we generally have seen Soriano win by finish in his wins, and then also you're looking at somebody in Roman Kopylov who we've seen finish before in the UFC, I think this is a pretty good spot to take Soriano in large field tournaments. Now, once again, a little hard to find the value to make us only be able to pay up for some of these, like mid to upper K8K guys. But Kopylov to me is somebody who I do like getting to, and I prefer him in that mid upper 8K range to somebody like Imavov. But what's your read on this fight?
Yeah, if I had to choose between Soriano and Ige on DraftKings, it would be Soriano. Now, Kopylov, he looks like the Russian Chase Hooper. He's not Chase Hooper. He can kind of hold his own on the feet there. He did knock out Alessio Di Chirico his last time out in September. Now, he lost by submission to Karl Roberson. That's kind of... Then he lost the decision to Albert Durev in 2021. He's not flashy by any means. And you look at his metrics, and it shows that. He lands 3.44 strikes per minute, but he absorbs 3.81. Anytime you're absorbing more than you're hitting someone, it's not good. You're getting hit more than you're, outputting. And he doesn't really wrestle. He's landed one takedown in the UFC. Soriano has the power advantage for sure. He lands 3.95 strikes per minute, which isn't great. He does wrestle a little bit more. He landed, 3 takedowns on Dana White's Contender Series against Jamie Pickett. He hasn't really gone to the wrestling too much in the UFC, just one. I think that could be a path here, but Soriano definitely has some finishing upside here. It's just this one, it kind of feels a little trappy too, because if this gets out of like the first round without Soriano knocking out, like, yeah, he can get there in the second round, but you're looking for, 90, 100 points plus. You just kind of are concerned that if he doesn't finish early, he's going to be another bust in GPPs.
Yeah. So once again, like, this is a fight where other ones I like a little bit more, but still, of the fighters we've talked about so far, I think that we have the best case to be made for rostering Soriano. I think he is, of all the fighters we've talked about so far, I think Soriano has the most upside of these 3 fights. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and his price isn't going to kill you, right? So, like, you don't need 130 DK points at 8,500 to hit the optimal lineup. If he gets a second round knockout and scores, I don't know, 97, there's a good chance he'll still get there despite, depending on like the other fighters in the top range. But if 97 to 105 points at 8,500, that should be optimal. You know what I mean? And then on the flip side, if the fight does go to decision, Kopylov at 7,700 could be an interesting, pivot off Strickland if you don't believe in his cardio or you don't think he's going to win. But again, like, it's hard to find fighters under that 8K, and Soriano has pretty high finishing upside here. So Kopylov is a risk because he has a very low floor here, but he could be an interesting pivot in GPPs off Strickland.
Yeah. So once again, I think that Kopylov, if we're to make a list of the underdogs that are at least worth getting some exposure to, he's in that category for sure. The next fight, though, Ketlin Vieira, Raquel Pennington, I'm not betting this fight. I'm going to be taking out of my player pool for DFS purposes. I hope we don't see something stupid happen, like a DQ win in the first round or some sort of weird, obscure finish. But I think pretty clearly, of all the fights that we have today, this one's close to a coin flip, so it's hard to say that there's a real good lean on who's going to win. But in addition to that, minus 330 to minus 350 to go to the judges' scorecards. Traditionally, Raquel Pennington fights do not score well for DraftKings or FanDuel purposes. Am I missing anything in this fight, or can we write it off and just kind of move along?
Yeah, I am going to have pretty low exposure to this fight. Like in 150, if you have a little bit, that's fine. Like, you're going to see Raquel Pennington with a lot of, cage work. You're just going to hold Vieira against the cage and vice versa. Generally a pretty low score. And the ownership reflects that, right? It's a mid-range fight, which this card, there's going to be some good mid-range builds, but like you see Ketlin Vieira, 8,200, 21%. That's low. Raquel Pennington, under 20%. Like, there's just nothing there. Like, the winner probably maybe will get to 80 in a decision if there's wrestling involved and control time, but Vegas has it lined over minus 300 to go to the decision. Chances are that's a good number. So unless like Ketlin Vieira has like 9 takedowns and 8 minutes of control time, which against Raquel Pennington seems like a very tall task, this is going to be a very low scoring fight on DraftKings today.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really see any way around it. And really quick, I'm just going to pull up the recent fantasy scores for Raquel Pennington. They're not great. And also, it's the way that she fights. It also smothers her opponents. It reduces their ability to really score well. So the recent fights for Pennington, by the way, these have actually been some of her better scores. 83 fantasy points, 93 against Macy Chesson, 75, 94, 25, 71, 26, 37, 78, 77. None of those are enough to win in a GPP. So to me, this is a fight that I'm not going to be getting any exposure to. Are you going to play any of it in large field tournaments, or just like me, you're going to take it out of the player pool?
I'm probably just going to exit. Like, that 93 points against Macy Chiasson was in a second round finish. You know what I mean? So, like, good chance that the winner is under 75 points if the fight goes decision, which it most likely is. So, I mean, if you want to play it in cash for the safety, I guess, but like even there, I'm gonna have no exposure in GPP.
So let's talk about the next fight then, moving on. Although first, shout out to our sponsor today, PrizePicks. And if you guys haven't signed up at PrizePicks yet, there's a couple reasons to it. First of all, you can get up to $100 bonus on your first deposit when you sign up using our link. But in addition, you're going to get 1 free month of Stokastic Plus Platinum, where you're going to find all the tools you need to build MMA DFS lineups. We've got our player projections. We've got our ownership projections. We've got the top fighters tool, which is going to give you, percentage of odds of fighters to reach their ceilings and to score 100 or more fantasy points. But it's not just MMA that we have covered over at Stokastic as well. We've got NBA tools, NFL tools with those 2 sports going on as well. So you're going to get all of that when you sign up over at PrizePicks using our link, which you can find below or in Discord channel right now. 1 free month Stokastic Plus Platinum and up to $100 bonus on your first deposit. But one of the fights that I'm looking forward to the most, Umar Nurmagomedov taking on Barcelos. And do you think there's any impact with Khabib stepping away as a coach to his cousin Umar here? Because I kind of think that it could have an impact on these fighters. It's really hard to know until we actually see it play out. And I think there's going to be a lot of narratives written in hindsight. Either these fighters look really good post Khabib, and we say it didn't really matter what he did as the coach because he was able to instill his wisdom in them. Or we see some of these guys maybe start to lose, which hasn't happened that much. Fighters cornered by Khabib during his time in the UFC, 19-2. But should we be concerned about Khabib not being in the corner for Umar and stepping away from coaching?
It's kind of hard to quantify that. You know what I mean? Like, I think Umar is still with Javier Mendez, so he's an excellent coach as well. So then you got Ronnie Barcelos, his metrics are good, but he is aging for MMA. Like, he's 35, which for MMA, a lot of tread on his tires though, but he does land 5.82 significant strikes per minute, absorbs almost 5. He has very good takedown defense. So like, yeah, you might say that Umar struggled out Khabib because he struggled taking Barcelos down, but like Barcelos has excellent takedown defense. Umar's undefeated though, and he's a minus 1,000 favorite in some spots. It's just kind of hard to plug in Barcelos today. He's one of those guys you have to consider though, just because the bottom tier of these fighters is just ugly. So maybe he can extend the fight. Maybe he can land some takedowns of his own. Like, Barcelos is the biggest name of these fighters in the 7,300 to under range. So maybe by default, he gets some ownership there. So going back to the original question, I just don't know what kind of impact it's going to have. I just think, Barcelos is a tough test for cousin Umar. I still think he's going to pass the test. It's just, is he going to do enough early to hit that optimal lineup? I think is the question.
Yeah, here's what I love Umar. I think he's a future champion. I think he's going to be a champion of the bantamweight division probably by the end of next year. Not this year, because I don't think he's going to have enough fights. I expect him to win this fight, and then I think he's going to step up in competition a few months from now, and then I think he makes his way into the top 5, and then sometime next year, I think we see Umar fight for the title. But Barcelos is a fighter who is, like you mentioned, really good takedown defense. It's a big step up in competition for Umar. And just relative to the other top-end fighters, I feel a little bit better about some of their upside. So Umar, I definitely think is a strong target, but relative to where I think his ownership is going to be, I'm probably going to be a little bit underweight to the field on him. Not really a knock against Umar at all, but still, it's really hard to find value to spend all the way up to the top-end guys. And I just think I'm going to be looking at other fighters a little bit more. So relative to the popularity of Umar, do you think he'll be over underweight to him projected to be 44% owned in large field tournaments?
Yeah, and if he wasn't Khabib's cousin, I don't think he'd be a minus 1,000 favorite. You know what I mean? He gets the name bump there, but like, yeah. The thing with Barcelos is he's tough in the first like 7.5, 10 minutes, maybe in the fight, but he has cardio issues as well. He tends to, kill or be killed. I feel like Umar can get a late finish here. I don't know if it's going to be enough compared to like Ribecchi or, Nasimento or Charles Johnson. If one of those guys finishes, like, I don't know. It's a weird one for me, just because based off his ownership, one of the top fighters on the field, but like it's the biggest matchup that he's had, and it worries me a little bit. Like you look at his previous fights, and I think he gets through him, Barcelos, no problem. But like Nate Manis, he beat Brian Kelleher, Sergey Morozov. Like, yeah, those are nice wins, but Barcelos is a very tough test. So I kind of agree. I'm going to be under the field. I'll still have some in 150. I don't think I'll be near the 45% that he's projected.
Yeah, and that to me is when I was just talking about Umar. Once again, it's not that I dislike him. I said I think he's going to be a champion at some point. I just can't imagine he's going to end up being in more than half my lineups today, which is really what it comes down to. Is, you know, if we could only roster one of the high end guys. Actually, I do prefer Ribecchi in this card to paying up for Umar Nurmagomedov. And then still, though, it's hard to get up to these guys at 50+% ownership just because there are so few underdogs we like on this slate. So I find it hard to pay all the way up to a bunch of these guys, and kind of where I stand with it. Not that I feel great about it. If Umar goes out and scores 130 points, I'm going to feel like a moron if I don't have him in, a million lineups, but just kind of the way the slate breaks down for me. Let's move on to the next fight. And we've got Javid Basharat taking on Mateusz Mandanka. And Mandanka looked really good on Contender Series, but a lot of guys look good on Contender Series, and it's kind of hard to put too much weight into it. Basharat's looked really good in the UFC so far. How do you like this fight in tournaments, and which side are you going to prioritize?
I really like Basharat as a fighter. Now, for DFS purposes, not so much. He's pretty low scoring. And I kind of like Mandanka just as one of those underdogs by default, because you look at his record on the amateur scene, or not the amateur scene, the regional scene. He won by, first round knockout in 48 seconds on the Contender Series. But like you said, like this is Dana White marketing machine at its best. Like, get these guys early finishes, get them in on 12 and 12 contracts, get some of the more highly paid guys out of there. You look at his regional scene, first round finish, first round by armbar, first round by TKO, first round by triangle choke, first round by Kimura. You know what I mean? Like, he has finishing upside here. I think he can crack. Again, you look at these guys' records that he's fighting, not great. He doesn't get pushed outside of the first round. I think, Mandanka might be one of those guys you put into GPPs and hope he can catch Basharat's chin in the first round, because if it gets out of the first round, it could get pretty ugly. But on the flip side, if Basharat doesn't finish, it feels like he's going to be a bust for GPPs.
It's weird matchmaking, right? Because Basharat, I think is a fair. Oh. Were you getting echo there?
A little bit, yeah.
Do you hear that echo, Mike? I'm not exactly sure what it is, but every time I talk, I could hear it again. Okay, whatever. So anyway, the matchmaking here for Basharat, he fought Tony Gravely in his last fight, Trevin Jones the fight before. Doesn't this feel like a step back in competition for him?
It feels like a step down, yeah. But this kid can crack, though. That's the thing. So I don't know.
Are you going to be taking shots on Mandanka then in tournaments as well?
I think so, just because, like, if he doesn't finish in the first round, maybe he still makes it to the decision. Like, beggars can't be choosers in this low range, right? I feel like, Cachoeira was going to be a popular target at 7,400. That fight fell off. So, like, you have to take chances on some of these guys to fit some of the top range guys. And, do you really want to put in Ronnie Barcelos against a minus 1,000 cousin Umar? Nick Fiore against Mateusz Ribecchi, you know what I mean? Jimmy Flick maybe has some finishing upside. Nick Aguirre maybe has some finishing upside, but like none of these guys you can be confident at all. So you got to take some stabs here and hope you can get a win. Otherwise, so yeah, Mandanka probably is going to see his way into some of my lineups, just because like Basharat by default in that top range is the lowest scorer up there. So I feel like he's going to be Mandanka at 7K is a nice way to save salary and just hope he can finish or maybe make it to the decision. Like, I have no confidence in him. Like, there's nothing like I can be like, oh yeah, this is just an awful misprice and he's favored here, here, and here. Basharat's probably better everywhere, but you have to take some chances on one of these guys down here.
This is why I'm going to end up playing Mandanka. Even though I like Basharat, I'm fully expecting Basharat to win. Mandanka's plus 270. Like, if we're just comparing some of the betting odds. Barcelos is plus 600. We got Nick Aguirre plus 390. Some of the other ones we've talked about. Fiore is plus 550. If we're just going based on the betting lines, Mandanka is way more likely to win than these other ones. And I don't expect him to win. But the problem is all of the big favorites are like minus 600, minus 700 today. And we have to take shots on some underdogs. And unfortunately, Mandanka, I don't expect him to win, but I think he has a little bit more win equity than some of the other guys. I feel like that's kind of what you're saying as well.
Yeah, it's just like you kind of hope the floor is there in the first round. Like maybe he has a moment. You know what I mean? Like one of those big moments he knocks down Basharat. Even if he doesn't get the finish, like Basharat is kind of like messed up for the rest of the fight and it goes to decision, but like I don't want to be putting Nick Fiore in my lineup to Ronnie Barcelos. There's just massive, massive underdogs. You're not going to make a living, putting in plus 600 fighters in your lineups. You know what I mean? So plus 270 based on the other guys in that range makes some sense. It's just you're looking for reasons. I think Basharat wins the fight. It's just you just kind of hope that Mandanka has a moment or two.
Yeah, and it's just hard to find underdogs that we really like on this slate, and the favorites we're going to feel really good about a lot of them. Now, the next fight we have, it's going to be hard to really find a side that we're in love with, but Abdulrazak Alhassan is taking on Claudio Ribiero. And this is a fight that no matter which side you think wins, I think we should be. If there's one thing we're confident in this fight, the winner's going to score well. Would you agree with that?
Yes, for the most part. There is always that possibility that both sides just absolutely bust because Alhassan, if he gets out of the first round, is just gassed. Ribiero, big first round finisher. Now, you look on the scale, right? Ribiero came in at 183. He didn't look very big. Alhassan has to cut weight to get to 185. I have no idea how he ever made 170. He is a thick boy. So he's going to be easily over 200 pounds here. He's going to have the advantages here. Now, we've seen Alhassan get absolutely just crushed by, what was this? Was it Chaos Williams?
Yeah. So we've seen a couple of fights that have not gone his way. One of them was the Chaos Williams fight. The other one was against Munir Lazez. And that was a fight where long layoff for Zach Alhassan. He didn't get finished in that fight, but he got the absolute shit beat out of him past the first round. But the Chaos Williams is the one where he absolutely got lit on fire.
Yeah. And that was like the first punch he took. He was just stiff as a board. And then he got wrestled to the moon by Jacob Malkoun, but I don't think you have to worry about that here. Like Abdulrazak Alhassan is going to have the power advantage. He's going to have the size advantage. This is heavily favored inside the distance. So like, while we can argue who's going to win this and that, I think you have to have heavy exposure to both sides because there's a good chance that it ends early. Obviously, there's that bust risk with any fight, really, but based off the odds, you're going to need exposure to both sides.
And my preference is going to be Abdulrazak Alhassan after the weigh-ins. So it's kind of weird because we've seen a lot of line movement. First, there was line movement in favor of Ribiero. You and I are on different sides of this, but we both had line value at different points. So the initial alignment was towards Ribiero. Then we saw the weigh-in happen, and then Abdulrazak Alhassan started to get a lot of action. So he is now the favorite. But let's see, what is the current inside the distance line? What would you guess it is if you haven't looked at it? Under 1.5 rounds.
Under 1.5, I'd probably line it like minus 270.
Yeah, it is minus 250 right now. This is to me the best fight on the card to target. There isn't that much value to get to. Both these guys are relatively cheap. I lean towards Alhassan, but I'm going to have one side of this fight in nearly every lineup I build.
Yeah, same. It's just, I got in early on Ribiero. It was like plus 101. I have some opportunity to kind of not like arbitrage it because Alhassan by knockout is like plus 140. You'd need him to win by knockout, but it's kind of plus money on both sides there. But this fight it's gonna end inside distance unless Alhassan completely just fades to black. Ribiero just fades to black, and you just get an ugly guy just swinging it. Like that's Ribiero's thing though. Like in the first round, like he's not technical at all. He just kind of throws haymakers, and if he connects, he connects. So this could be an ugly fight if it gets over 1.5. But I expect it to finish it pretty early.
All right, let's hit on some of the super chats. And one here from Jorge Giacomi, who says that He screwed up his last super chat, but who would you recommend for single entry large field GPP tournament? So who's a couple fighters that you would say we should be targeting in single entry GPPs?
So single entry, you're probably going to want the main event, right? And depending on what side you're on.
I don't think you need the main event.
Yeah, that's true, but Strickland, if you like the Strickland side, I think it's more likely to have him in your lineup just because he's 7,700. But I think you need one of the top guys, either Ribecchi or cousin Umar. Argetta, -600 favorite, 8,600 stands out. Like he has massive value based on his price and line. So those are, I want one of the top end guys, and I want Argetta, unless you're on Nick Aguirre, which we'll talk about. Like Nick Aguirre has some finishing upside, but then you got to kind of look at these underdogs, and it's ugly, man. If you have a lean on one of these underdogs, play them. Like there's all these guys 73 and under. We've talked about it ad nauseum already. I don't think any of those guys are going to win. We're looking for reasons to play them, and you just kind of hope they hit some value in a loss.
I'm going to say, well, so how about this? If you had to pick one underdog who isn't Strickland to play in a single entry lineup, who would you be picking?
Well, I'll take Ribiero out of there just because, like, he's 7,900.
So how about one? If you were to pick one fighter cheaper than Strickland to play in a large field tournament in a single entry, who would you pick?
I think it's Mandanka or Aguirre. Like, I like Jimmy Flick. I think he has some finishing upside, but if he doesn't get the early finish, he's gonna get finished. So Mandanka, just because he's the smallest underdog compared to the guys down there. Nick Aguirre, I think, has some submission upside, albeit not very much. He's a massive underdog, but if he does win, that's his path to victory.
I'm going to start with Carlos Hernandez. I just think he's the most safety of any of the cheap fighters we're looking at. In addition, I think there's a real case that, like we talked about at the top, this could be a slate where there's a losing in the optimal lineup. And I think that's most likely to be Carlos Hernandez just because the fight is a good chance to go to decision. So my answer is going to be Carlos Hernandez. Mid-range, my favorite fighter to target is Abdulrazak Alhassan. And then paying up in single entry, I'm going to say Ribecchi.
Yeah, I agree on Ribecchi for sure. Yeah, and the mid-range, one of Alhassan and Ribiero, if you have a lean. Like, we can argue back and forth on who's going to win that fight. No one will know until it happens, No strong lean there.
And then getting back to the Ribiero, Abdulrazak Alhassan fight, anything else to add here? I think we're both in agreement. It's a really good fight to target. It's likely to finish early. Like we said, about -250 to finish inside of a round and a half. But once again, a pick 'em, it's really hard to say with uber confidence which side is more likely to win. But play both sides, and this is a really strong fight to target.
Yeah, again, I have no strong lean. I have my confidence in either guy is not very high, but a fight line like that to end inside the distance, you're going to want exposure to both sides.
All right, so the next one, Matus Ribecchi taking on Nick Fiore. Ribecchi, one of the biggest favorites on the card. Umar, slightly bigger favorite at this point. But to me, Ribecchi, large field tournaments, I think he's the guy to pay up for. I think he's the most safety and the most upside on the high end. I like paying up for Ribecchi. A little tough to get up to him at more than the field is. Currently project for 47% ownership. What are you going to be doing with Ribecchi and Fiore in large field tournaments?
So I'll start with Fiore. The positives here, he fights out of the New England cartel. That's a very good camp. Like, he's training with a lot of good guys there. His regional scene, all first round finishes. So that's the positives. Now we get to the negatives. The guys he's fighting on the regional scenes, 5-19 record, 15-13, 8-4, 3-9, 15-98. I had to look that up to see if that was legit, and it looks pretty legit. The guy's just getting crushed, 15-98. So, like, one, there's no tape of him getting extended into the second round. Two, the guys he is finishing are not good fighters. And then you look at Ribecchi. These are the guys we target on DraftKings, right? The guys who have grappling upside, and Ribecchi has grappling upside here. He beat what was the guy's name? Rodrigo Lidio on the Contender Series. He won by submission. Got 2 takedowns very early. Looked really good on top. Was flowing. Got the rear naked choke. I think there is some serious finishing upside for Ribecchi with, grappling and control time. Maybe it gets dicey early with Fiore just because, he wins, his only wins are in the first round. Like we've never seen him extend into the second or the third. So if it gets into there, I feel like Ribecchi is going to be even more favored there if he doesn't finish in the first. He's going to have the cardio advantages, the wrestling advantages. It's just Ribecchi is pound for pound probably my favorite play on this slate. It's just a matter of being able to pay up for him and get a lineup that you're comfortable with.
If pricing wasn't an issue, we'd be playing all the Ribecchi in the world. That's really the only concern, is just how are we going to comfortably pay up for him when there's so few underdogs we like. So once again, if I could only pay up for one fighter, my choice would be Ribecchi, but the salary restrictions will make it hard to have him in, say, like 100% of lineups or anything like that. And as we move on to the next fight, Alan Nasimento against Carlos Hernandez, I'm going to be targeting Carlos Hernandez in large field tournaments, not because I think he's going to win. And we actually, we've got our guy, Narco Cop, who's going to be doing content for us over on the sports betting side over at OddsShopper for us. And he's saying that he likes Nasimento in this matchup. I do too. I like Nasimento in this matchup. I think he's the better wrestler. I think he's the better grappler. I think he's got potential for DraftKings to earn an early submission for sure. But at the same time, I have to look at some of the lines for these fights. And when Nasimento is minus 320, relative to the other expensive fighters, he's just not quite as likely to win as like an Umar Nurmagomedov or as a Matus Ribecchi. So I'm going to be playing some of Carlos Hernandez in large field tournaments, mostly because there's a lack of underdogs that I think have a realistic chance at winning.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? Nasimento does have sneaky finishing upside here. Has he shown it in the UFC? No, but he's fought, making up words now. On the Contender Series, he fought Paiva, lost the split decision. Then he fought Tigir Ulanblankov in his UFC debut, which is a very tough fight. He lost a split decision there. Then he beat Jake Hadley by decision there. He showed some wrestling upside there. I think, Nasimento is the better wrestler, is the better grappler. Carlos Hernandez grinds out fights. You know what I mean? His last 2 fights, he's won by split decision. Before that, on the regional scene, went to decision. He did have a couple early finishes here, but he's never been finished, which is a good sign. So, again, do I think Nasimento wins this fight? Yes. But does Carlos Hernandez have a chance to score 38 points in a decision loss? Yes. Is that going to be enough? Could be. So, yeah, I think targeting both sides here makes some sense. And I kind of do agree with the fighter 7,300 and under that Carlos Hernandez does have the highest floor.
Yeah, and if we had to make a list, by the way, of which underdogs do you think are most likely to end up in an optimal lineup in a loss, I would say Carlos Hernandez is one, and then probably Mandanka being the other one.
Yeah, in a loss, absolutely. It's that is the list. I think maybe Barcelos has some wrestling in the beginning. It's just hard to see it. Yeah, in a loss, I would put Carlos Hernandez 1, Mandanka 2, and that's kind of the list.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with Barcelos in a loss, well, number one, he's really cheap, but the problem if he loses is that he's going to get wrestle fucked by Umar, and you just don't score fantasy points when you're laying on your back. So it's not hard to see a scenario where Umar wins a decision and Barcelos scores 8 fantasy points.
Yeah, this fight could eerily look similar to Khabib against that Brazilian fighter who looks like Ronnie Barcelos, Edson Barboza. It could look eerily similar to that. Yeah. I'm just my mind is just going blank on some of these names, but yeah. I like the fighters in the top range, just you're going to have to get comfortable being uncomfortable clicking in some names to that. It's just what's going to happen.
And then what are you going to do with Nasimento in large field tournaments? He's not as big of a favorite as a lot of these other guys at the high end. There's obvious upside if he was to get an early submission. At the same time, too, we haven't seen him put up a good DraftKings score. He's probably my lowest priority of the pay-up options of the really top-tier guys. But what are you going to do with him?
Yeah, he's about 20% lower than these other guys in the top range. I think he has some sneaky finishing upside. So if you want to get away from the super chalky Ribecchi and cousin Umar, I think you can put in Nasimento for some sneaky upside here. If he doesn't get that early finish, like, you're gonna be in trouble unless he has like 6 or 7 takedowns. But like those are the chances you have to take in these large field GPPs to win them. So I don't mind him as a leverage play per se, but if I'm only making like 20 lineups, I'm gonna prioritize Ribecchi and Nurmagomedov.
Yeah, we're on the same page as that, and that's why also Nasimento, I'm not going to really get all that much of them. But let me check the Mike. Can you pull up the top fighters tool again? I want to see where we're at on these guys. So Nasimento, we've got projected for 29% ownership. Carlos Hernandez, 20%. I'm probably going to be underweight to Nasimento and overweight to Hernandez based on those ownerships. Is that what you think you'll be as well?
Yeah, I mean, like, maybe I'll get close-ish to the field on Nasimento, but I'll definitely be over on Carlos Hernandez.
So let's move on to the next fight, which is the biggest line value spot amongst the high-end fighters. Dan Argetta taking on Nick Aguirre. Aguirre stepping in on short notice. So hard to know how prepared Aguirre is for this fight, but we've got Dan Argetta, who we know has wrestling upside. We saw him even in a loss in his last fight. Let me pull up the stats for that one. So Dan Argetta, last time out against Damon Jackson, even in the loss, he was able to go to a decision against Damon Jackson. He was able to defend a couple of takedowns, landed a takedown. I thought he pretty clearly won the last round of that fight, if I remember correctly. He rallied a little bit. I don't love Dan Argetta, but at the same time, too, it's hard to not side with the line value. I think if we're looking at leverage plays, you can make a case for Aguirre in large field tournaments, but the clear priority here is going to be Dan Argetta.
Yeah, and he's going to be the most popular just because of his price based on his line. Now, here's the issue I'm running into, because when Argetta was fighting Isaac Dulgarian, I was on Dulgarian here. So I think I'm going to take some stabs on Nick Aguirre. Now, Nick Aguirre, like you said, don't know what kind of shape he's in, if he's prepared. He last fought in, the middle of December, but if he pulled a strong Strickland, he hasn't been training in a month. You know what I mean? You always have the holidays in there too. So he didn't seem to have issues on the scale. So that's always good. The first fight is always with the scale, and he looked pretty good. Now, he has some early finishes, but this regional scene is out of the Midwest in the US, which isn't like exactly the powerhouse regional scene, but he has all of his wins are early finishes: ground and pound, rear naked choke, TKO, triangle choke, guillotine choke. Like, he has submission upside here. Now, the guys he's fighting, very minimal records. Now, is he going to have a moment where he gets Argetta in a dangerous position? It's certainly possible. But if he doesn't, he's another one of those guys in the bottom range here that has a very low floor, but he has the potential to win. He's a finisher. He's seen on the regional scene. He's 11-1 in the current books to win by submission. But I think that's his path to victory. And if it is, it's going to happen early. And if he does win by submission early, he's probably going to break the slate. If one of these guys in the low end punt range that we've talked about wins, they're going to be on the optimal lineup.
Yeah, and I mean, once again, Aguirre, if I'm playing him in large field tournaments, it's really just for leverage because, based on the line value on Dan Argetta, who, once again, I expect to win, but just the way I play MMA DFS on DraftKings, it's hard for me to not like Aguirre just based on what I expect the ownership split to be.
Yeah, he's going to be one of the lowest, if not the lowest owned. We have him projected at 6.4% right now. So for his finishing upside, like, it doesn't take much to get over the field if you're putting in 150. So yeah, like, even if you double or double the field at 13%, I think that's fine. Argetta projected almost 50% here for good reason. Minus 600 favorite at 8,600. Again, do I expect Aguirre to win? No. But he's one of those guys who has legitimate upside early if he can capitalize on it. Otherwise, he's going to lose.
And the other thing to add here, too, is because you just mentioned the ownership, right? 6%. And now here's a way to look at it. We know how much variance there is in MMA. I think Argetta is going to win. Here's why for large field tournaments, I like Aguirre, though. If he wins this fight, he's fairly likely to be optimal. right? I think we're both on the same page with the finishing upside and the lack of underdogs to target. And he's only projected for 6% ownership. He certainly wins this fight more than 6% of the time, which probably means he's optimal probably, I don't know, 25, 30% of the time on this slate, something along those lines. That makes him very appealing. The fact that you could have somebody who, if the slate plays out 4 times, Aguirre is going to be optimal in one of them probably. And he's only projected for 6% ownership. So I think he's going very under-owned for the slate, and I understand why. But large field tournaments, I'm going to be overweight to Nick Aguirre and probably underweight to Dan Argetta. It will probably go poorly more often than not, but the times it goes well, it's going to pay off really in a really big way.
Yeah, and it's always, at least our Argetta is 8,600. Sometimes we see these like mispricings where like he's minus 600 at 7,900, and then it's just like an automatic free square. 8,600 is at least a conversation where you can fade and hope he doesn't get a finish, and you hope like guys in his range like Soriano or Ige outscore him. You know what I mean? So at 6% on Aguirre, definitely going to be over the field there. Just, short notice. Could he get absolutely stomped? Yeah. But like, does he have upside? Yeah. Like you mentioned, like 1 in 4 slates, he's going to be optimal. So you got to take some stabs, I think.
Now, the final fight of the night, we've got Charles Johnson going up against Jimmy Flick. As for Charles Johnson, I've not been super impressed with him so far in the UFC. Now, he had the fight last time out against Zhalgar Zhumagulov. Every single Zhumagulov fight ends up being a split decision. I always end up thinking Zhumagulov won, and then he never does. So I thought that Zhumagulov won that fight, did not ultimately get the nod from the judges. And then UFC debut for Charles Johnson came up against Muhammad Makayev, and he just got held down for the entire fight. 12 takedowns landed by Makayev. Jimmy Flick does have a grappling upside. I don't think he's going to be able to implement it in the same way that we saw Makayev do with the wrestling and being able to hold down Charles Johnson or anything like that. Overall, this is a fight that I am not going to have really that much interest in relative to a lot of the other fights we've talked about. It's a lower priority fight, but do you have a strong lean on this one?
I don't, but like I see a lot of people talking up Jimmy Flick about his finishing upside. Like, yeah, he does finish fights. His 2 in the UFC, well, 1 on Contender Series and against Cody Durden, were submission wins. But Charles Johnson is hard to finish. He got absolutely destroyed by Muhammad Makayev, and he's a finishing machine. You know what I mean? He subbed Cody Durden. He subbed Malcolm Gordon. Makayev took him down 12 times. That means Charles Johnson is looking to work himself up. He's not going to settle for bottom position. So I feel like Jimmy Flick's going to go for it and, get himself into a submission attempt and end up in a bad position. I think Charles Johnson's just going to take advantage of it. Now, again, we're talking about this bottom range where no one's comfortable. So yeah, I think he can take a stab on Jimmy Flick and hope he can find that finish. But if he doesn't find that finish early, I don't think he's going to be in this fight per se. Charles Johnson, 56% takedown defense. Again, that's kind of skewed because he got taken down 12 of 26 times against Makayev and only once against Zhumagulov, who attempted only 4. So again, do I think Charles Johnson wins? Yes. Can he take a shot on Flick? Yes. I just have a hard time seeing if Flick doesn't catch him in an early submission, him winning by decision. I just think it's a low outcome, a low percentage outcome.
Any other, we reach the end here, and a lot of other content on the YouTube channel today, guys. If you haven't done it yet, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've got the NFL slate covered today. I'm going to be hosting the NFL show. We've also got the NBA slate tonight, so NBA live before lock. Once again, like the video, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Do you have any other takeaways for this card, Josh?
I mean, the big thing is you're just going to have to plug your nose and plug one of these low-end guys in if you're spending up for Ribecchi or Nurmagomedov, and hope that one of them, can get to 40 points in a loss. You can build mid-range stuff without going to the top-end guys. That could be a path to victory. I think if you're building 150, you have to consider some mid-range builds here without going to the top and hope that it's not a finish fest, because you don't have to go down into that bottom range. But again, there are some pretty heavy scoring guys at the top range. So one way or another, you're going to have some uncomfortable clicks. on this slate. So, just get comfortable being uncomfortable.
And once again, if you guys want access to all of the MMA tools we have over at Stokastic.com, get a 5-day free trial just by clicking on the link below. Our fighter projections, our ownership projections. Also, you can look at our top fighters tool and all different kinds of metrics like we're showing on the screen of just here. We've got the ownership, we've got the expected pace of the fight, the odds of them being one of the top 6 scoring fighters on the slate, their odds of scoring 100 or more fantasy points. So all really useful stuff for building lineups in large field tournaments. Free access for 5 days by clicking on the link below, or you can find it right now in the YouTube chat. But that is going to do it for us today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Enjoy the card tonight, and good luck.
Good luck, everybody.